Hello, listeners, and welcome back once again to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I've got a great guest lined up for you on this episode. One of the key issues for leadership that we've discussed time and time again is effective communication. And a big part of that is also presenting, whether you think of it as a big presentation or whether you're just presenting information in a meeting or to a colleague. The skills involved are core to being a successful leader and manager. So my guest today is Simon Raybould, who is an expert in all things communication. He teaches how to be a better public speaker and presenter. And he's also got a fair bit of experience in leadership and management as well. So really looking forward to this one, and I hope you all enjoy it.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Simon, thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning. I don't know what it's like up north where you are, but down here it's gloomy and miserable.
I am really looking forward to this, and I've got patchy little white fluffy bunny clouds.
Well, now you're just showing off, aren't you? But anyway, let's talk about leadership and stuff, because that'll cheer us up, or cheer me up from the gloomy weather. So I'm going to start by taking a bit of a risk and handing it over to you to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, your career history, what you do today, and why you do it.
All right, I'm Simon. Technically, I'm Dr. Simon Raybould, but nobody ever uses the doctor unless I'm trying to order a restaurant in a table in a restaurant. I used to be a research scientist. I am now a presentation skills trainer. I made the transition about 15 years ago, starting about 20 years ago. So there was a 5-year overlap. I've also been a lighting designer for dance companies. I've been a fire eater. I've been a trainer, facilitator, teacher, playwright, and author. Not in that order. And some of them at the same time.
That's quite varied. Yeah.
Yeah. The plan is to find a job that I'm good at and stick with it, but I haven't managed that yet.
How does fire eating appear on the same resume as speaking?
Yeah. Okay. So the obvious and facetious answer is why the hell not?
Yeah.
But it came out of some drugs education work I was doing in schools. Mm-hmm. When I needed to do two things. The first is I needed to get the students I was talking to understand the concept of risk taking. And the other thing I needed to get them to do was to shut up, sit down and pay attention. Because if I'm talking about drugs and risk taking, some of the schools I was working in, the kids are going, F off, sir, I've had more drugs than you've had hot dinners, But if there's somebody at the front of the room that stuffs burning things in his mouth and then breathes fire and stuff, they tend to pay a little bit more attention. But importantly, then you get them talking about the risks and similarities and differences between drug taking and fire eating. Both look cool. So there's lots of similarities and all that kind of stuff. Right? When you're 15, drugs look cool, at least. But then you start talking about the differences. And the differences are that I know exactly how hot it's going to be. If you're taking a drug, you don't know exactly what you're getting. I can do it in public with a fully qualified triage nurse just standing beside me. You've got to do it covertly. If it goes wrong, I can pull the burning flames out of my mouth. But once you've mainlined, once you've injected, you can't get it out of your system. And we had some really interesting conversations about the risks that people were taking without really, really having thought them through. And it was fun. I did it for a while alongside some of my other jobs, got some nice results, but then kind of moved on and did other things.
That went in a slightly different direction than I expected. I thought you were going to tell me it was a hobby.
It is a bit of a hobby, although I haven't done it for a while after my wife caught me teaching my 12-year-old daughter how to do it. Oh. And at which point she quite loudly suggested that it was irresponsible parenting and that I was never to do it again. I think the phrase irresponsible parenting should go down in legend. But yeah, it was, I think that's the only time in 40 years, the only time my wife has really had an absolute screaming paddy at me for teaching a 12-year-old. What could go wrong? 12-year-old child, paraffin, matches. It seemed perfectly sensible to me at the time.
Yeah, not to take sides, but...
Oh, what, another one, voting with my wife?
I mean, fire and kids generally, those to me don't go together, but there we are.
She was responsible. She was, and as my wife started shouting at me, my daughter went, Mummy, it's fine. Dad's been very sensible. I've been practicing with water first, and which is so far so good. And then she put me in it by going, and while I've been doing that, Daddy's been over there practicing his new trick. His new trick is called the Hiroshima. And at the point when your daughter stitches you up for practicing a trick named after a nuclear bomb, you just know that there's no way back.
Yeah, that's not ending well, is it?
No. Should we move on and get away from my rubbish parenting skills?
I could talk about fire eating for a while. I find that quite interesting. But anyway, so how did you first become interested in communication and public speaking, and what led you to become a trainer in those things as well?
The training was the obvious route, because I got promoted within my research unit, and eventually I ended up being centre manager for what was then, it was the UK's largest social science research unit, and I had kind of 32 professor grades and all of that kind of jazz. But I was getting asked the same really quite stupid questions over and over and over again from politicians, and I realized that either one of two things was true. Either scientists were really bad at explaining what they did, or politicians were really very bad at understanding what was explained to them. Turns out both of those things are true. And politicians willfully, because they, if you explain reality to them, it doesn't match what they want it to react. They just pretend they've not understood. But scientists were amenable to the idea of trying to be better, because that's what scientists are like. We want to make the world better. We want to be better. So I shifted my substantive research field from what it was to how do you communicate? And I did the scientific research stuff for 5 years of how to make better presentations. So my first clients were the people around me at the university, and then other universities. And then it expanded further and further into business. So the difference between me and most presentation trainers is that most of them will go, what I do that works is this, and try and turn people into clones of themselves. Because of my research background, what I do is go, statistically, what works most for most people most of the time is this. Try that. If it doesn't work, we'll try the second most likely thing to, if you swear to me. So for me, it's all based upon the hardcore research of what's most likely to work for most people most of the time. And if that means you turn out as a presenter using a completely different style to me, even if it's one that I hate, then that's okay, because you've developed that presentation style using the principles of how to get your message across to your audience, rather than how to pretend to be me talking to your audience.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go down a darker path there, where you started saying about stupid questions, but then it was okay because you added the word politicians, and then suddenly it made sense to me.
To be honest, the general public asks stupid questions as well, but that's fair enough. There's no reason why you would expect them to understand statistical probability and risk analysis and all of that kind of thing. But you would expect politicians who are making decisions about life and death stuff, about public spending and so on, to be able to understand things like return on investment and all the kind of, and some of them did and some of them didn't. And I'm pretty sure the ones that didn't did really, but didn't want to.
And I think that distinction there is why when a politician asks that question, it's a stupid question. Whereas if a member of the public asked it, even if it's the same question, it's not necessarily a stupid one.
It's a genuine question. Yeah. It's not, I'm being facetious. Of course I am. But for me, it's not about genuine the question. It's about whether you're asking the question to learn or whether you're asking the question to prove that you're right. And there's a huge difference between those things. And scientists very much ask the question. I mean, there are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, scientists ask questions in order to learn. Most people ask questions in order to learn, but there are some people who ask questions to which they want a very specific answer because they need to be right for their own purposes. And I've got very little time for those people.
Yes. Or they just, as you say, ignore the answer if it doesn't fit what they wanted to hear.
Yeah, they'll just go and ask somebody else the same question and keep asking until they get the same answer.
Indeed.
Which is a bit disappointing and a bit disingenuous. I fight it when I can, but sometimes you just have to roll with it and go, I can't fight that. You're too authoritarian. You're so much not interested that I'll just let it go.
Yeah. So fair to say then that you disagree with the statement, there is no such thing as a stupid question.
I'm much more of the opinion that the only stupid ones are the ones you don't ask.
Ah, good.
There's
I like it.
There's very often, one of the things I kind of talk about quite often in my presentation skills training, not by design, just the way it comes up, is this thing where I ask people, have you ever sat in an audience and not understood something, but not asked about what you don't understand? Because obviously everybody else understands and you don't want to look stupid. And of course, everybody puts their hands up because we've all done that at some point. And then the second question I ask is, and what do you think everybody else is thinking at the same time as you're doing that? And there's this ripple of laughter of recognition around the room when they go, do you know what? Everybody else is sitting there not understanding it, but not asking because they don't want to be thought to be stupid. And you can't really fight that. It's an example of something called pluralistic ignorance. Your responsibility as a trainer, as a presenter, is to deliver something in a way that the audience are never put in that position. Or at least, if they are in that position, they don't feel so intimidated by you that they don't ask the question. God, I sound so sanctimonious, don't I?
I think it's quite relatable, though. I think we've all been there. We all, even in business meetings or whatever at work, we're not necessarily in a being presented to or being trained kind of context. And you do. There's that social pressure that you don't want to be made to look stupid by asking a question. I think
you're absolutely right. But I would pick up on one point, which is you gently said there, we're not in the being presented to kind of mode. If you're in a meeting, you're being presented to. Even if it's just a round table conversation, the people who are talking at the time are making a presentation about what they think and what they think you should be doing as a business or as an individual or whatever. It may not be the standing at the front with the slides behind you presentation, but it is a style, a form of presentation.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And when I said it, I had in my mind at a conference or a keynote speech or something like that. Yeah. But I see your point.
Yeah. Well, obviously, yes. If you're standing at the front on a stage in a conference presentation, obviously you are doing presentations. Yes. Yeah. The interesting thing about those, of course, is that most of the really interesting conversations happen in the coffee bar after the presentation, where somebody goes, "So you said so and so. What exactly did you?" And the really in-depth stuff happens then. The first question, of course, to ask any presenter, when you meet them in the bar afterwards is, what would you like to drink? That's the first question always to ask them, I've discovered.
Yes, and as many people know that, the better, I'm sure, from your point of view.
Absolutely. A nice Mendoza Malbec, please, since you're asking. Yes.
Good, right. Well, we've got that noted. Excellent. Hope everyone was paying attention to that one. Flipping to the other side of it, obviously, we talked about the pressures there on the audience and people listening. Why is it, do you think, from the other side of the table, in inverted commas, so many people struggle with presenting itself and public speaking?
So I'm going to go for a twofold answer. There's the one that everybody will give. Every presentation trainer in the world will cite this first answer. The first answer is it's to do with exclusion. Because if you're part of a tribe, let's go back millions of years and you're part of a tribe, the worst thing that the tribe could do is kill you. The second worst thing the tribe could do is throw you out of the tribe, because that would kill you. Because as individual human beings, we're just not strong enough to survive in the wild. We need a tribe around us. We're a tribal people. We hunt as teams. We survive as teams. We fight as teams. We work as teams. We build and farm as teams. So sticking your neck out and not being part of the group is evolutionarily built into us as something we don't want to do. Standing at the front is a risky thing to do. And there's a tongue-in-cheek little bit of me that goes that anybody who wants to do that almost by definition shouldn't be allowed to do it because they're sociopathic. But I'm being somewhat facetious about that last little bit, obviously. But the second answer I'm going to give you is to do with something I'm going to call the T-shaped learning curve. And it'd be so much easier to demonstrate this if I could just show you. But let's take accountants, for example. They start off as a junior accountant, and then they become a middling accountant, and then they become a senior accountant, and then they become primary accountant. And all of those promotions are based upon their ability to do accounting. But suddenly when you're principal accountant, accounting is not what you do. Now what you do is management, but you've been trained in accounting. And so all of those things that leaders and managers do, such as presentations, motivation, all of that kind of jazz, that's a completely new experience to you that you've just never come across training for. I mean, there are exceptions to every rule. Obviously, I'm generalizing, but the number of people I work with, and in fact, my specialist target audience is those people who are technically incredibly good at what they do, but have never been trained in the other elements of now what they've got to do because they've crossed that threshold from practitioner into manager of practitioners. And my experience has been that the reason that most leaders and managers are rubbish at presentations is because they've never been trained in decent presentations. Just like it's not their fault. They've not been trained in anything. Just like they've not been trained in motivation or difficult conversations or, you name it. All of the other things that leaders and managers do.
Yes, I definitely prefer your second answer. I think the first one is perhaps, well, it's oft repeated, but I think it's a bit too convenient fit to the problem. I don't think it.
Oh, it's certainly true.
You know what I mean?
It's just that it's only part of the solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is that underlies a lot of it, but there are other elements to things as well.
Yeah.
Mainly and I'm going to get personal now. So what I've given you so far has been the two research answers. This is my personal third answer. So take this one with a pinch of salt because it's not research based. It's just experience based.
Okay.
Most speakers, most presenters, most leaders are bad speakers because they have only ever seen bad speakers. And they think that's what they are supposed to do. If they have only ever seen people who have their script on a slide, that's what they think they are supposed to do. They don't know that it's rubbish because they've never been exposed to anything that actually works. And a lot of the time, my job is a question of convincing people that doesn't work. And they go, yeah, I know it doesn't work. And I go, well, why do you do it then? And they go, well, what are the alternatives? It's like people a long time ago, before Macs became popular, people used Windows machines because that's what they had been given at school. Because that's how Microsoft became popular. It just gave away everything. So people didn't know that there was an alternative. That alternative might have been better. Let's not get into the Mac Windows debate, but let's pretend for now that, Mac is better just for the sake of this argument. Let's pretend Mac is better. But nobody would use it at that point because they'd never come across it. It was alien to them. They'd use the Windows stuff because that was all they ever knew. People use PowerPoint because that is all they ever know. They use bullet points on a screen because that is all they ever know. And my job is largely to expose them to the alternatives.
Yes. And do you think there's another aspect when we're talking about managers and leaders where maybe laziness comes into it because they know they've got a captive audience? The people have to listen to them because they're in charge. So they don't necessarily work very hard at how they're presenting it.
Possibly, but not my clients.
Oh, no, of course not. No.
By definition, my clients are the ones who want to do something about it, who want to be better. So I can't really answer that question with anything other than cynicism.
Fair enough. But yeah, and I think there's a lot of parallels I see in what you're talking about there with the training side of it and just leadership and management training at a higher level, not just the specific aspects of it, but the whole thing, And we talk about, I'm constantly whinging about this problem of the accidental manager. And that's exactly what you just described. It's they get promoted up and up and up because they're good at the last job they had, and then they're never given training to do the next job. And it creates bad speakers. It creates bad managers. And ultimately it leads to ineffective teams, poor staff retention, bad financial performance of the business and so on and so on and so on.
I would argue that, like the army, we should be training people in leadership as a speciality. In the same way as accounting is a speciality, leadership is a speciality. HR is a speciality. Now, it's a little bit unreasonable, I guess, because you can't really train people to be managers if they've never done any of the thing that they are managing. Actually, that's not true, because the army do it and the theatre does it. And both of those are pretty damn successful. But business doesn't think like that.
No, this is it. I think the other way that the forces get it massively right in this field is part of the selection to do that next job. You have to go through the training and how to do it first, and then you have to be assessed on how well you've taken on that training before you're allowed to do the job. And that's the right way around in my book.
Yeah, it's better than do the job and then give you the training on it.
Yeah.
Or worst case scenario, which is what most happens, is give you the job and don't give you the bloody training. Yeah.
Well, it's push you in at the deep end and don't teach you how to swim. And if you drown, it's your fault, not theirs. Yeah.
Yeah. So the vast majority of my clients are those people who've just gone over that cusp, and they recognize that as a leader or as a manager, presenting and communicating in a general way is now a very, very, very significant part of what they do. And I've got to wean them off being computer programmers or HR experts or accountants or whatever it is, and turn them into communicators. It can be done. Of course it can be done. I make a living out of it, but and hand on heart, I'm making respectable. I'm not pleading poverty here. I'm making a respectable living out of it. But it is sometimes frustrating that training happens after the event. And quite often I find it only happens in a crisis where somebody invites them to a conference and they go, yeah, I'll do that. And then they go, oh, shh, what can I do? I bet it, right, Simon, I've got 3 weeks for this conference. What can I do? And you just look at them and go, you know that adage about the best time to plant a tree being 20 years ago? The second best time is now. I can get you somewhere in 3 weeks, but it would have been nicer if I'd had 3 months.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, very, very clear parallel there to leadership training as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would regard communications and presentations training as an essential component of leadership training.
I 100% agree. And that leads perfectly into the next question, which is effective communication obviously is at the heart of successful leadership and management. You know, if you can't communicate the vision apart from anything else, you're never going to succeed at it. There's very few managers out there, I think, who will get away with being ineffective presenters. So what are the most important aspects that you would advise a leader manager to focus on so they can become better at those core skills?
I've got one philosophical observation. Lots and lots and lots of tactics, which you can ask about later. But the philosophical conversation is this. Almost universally, when leaders and managers have come to me and said, I need to be a better communicator, what they want me to concentrate on is making them look better in the room and being a better performer. I'm using the sense performer in a very, very general sense, so that people like and engage with their presentations and they feel good about it. And everybody goes, great presentation, boss. Loved it. But actually, here's a silly question. Would you judge a report by its choice of font? Is anybody, are you going to sit there in the font? I love this report, but I'm going to ignore it because it was written in Helvetica rather than Arial. And it was, of course, no, right.
Some people might, I don't know.
Some people might, but they would be shut against the wall when the revolution comes. So would you judge a presentation on how many jokes there were in it? Surely the only metric that matters as a manager is, did you have an outcome in mind? And if so, did you achieve it? Everything else flows from that. So it's not about being an engaging presenter. It is about being an effective, successful presenter. So it may be that your presentation is about the fact that the company is facing hard times and what you need to do about it. Well, making an engaging presentation about that is great, but if people don't turn off the lights, turn their computers off and do other money-saving measures, it's just been an hour's entertainment. And everybody gets hooked up on the delivery of the presentation, the engagement of it, how funny was it, how accessible was it, and yada, 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 yada. forgetting that those things are not the point of the presentation. Those things are the means to an end. The end is, do they adopt the new policy on? Do they change their behavior on Y? Do they behave more X? Do they decrease the amount of Z that they do as a company? I'm being very general, but you get the gist. So as a presentations trainer of managers and leaders, I'm much more focused on was the presentation successful rather than was the presentation good? You need to be quite good in order to be successful, but you don't need to be Steve Jobs level of good. You just need to be good enough. And that's kind of where most practical, realistic boardroom level presentations are. In fact, that's where most conference presentations are, to be honest. That's better than most conference presentations, if I'm really brutal about it. But people forget that presentations are a means, not an end. And if you go into designing your presentation with that in mind, you're going, what do I need out of this? What's the best way of getting it? Then I'm going to say everything else falls into place. I'm putting huge, great air quotes around the phrase, everything else falls into place, because it doesn't just miraculously fall into place. You've got to work at it. But at least now you have a fighting chance of it falling into place rather than just wanting to get a nice warm round of applause at the end of the gig.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. Yeah. I love means to the end as well, I think.
It's just a means to an end. That's all it is. The only time it's not been a means to an end, for me personally, in my professional speaking component, was when somebody said, you're closing the conference just before Christmas. Can you, as well as the content which we need from you, can you finish with a Christmas high? Because we're going straight to the Christmas party after this. And even then, it was partially a means to an end. The means was finish on a Christmas high. But at that point, it was much more about the fun of the presentation itself rather than the That was the first time I finished a presentation playing drums on stage, by the way. It was quite fun.
Nice.
Yeah. Great way to get standing ovation.
Assuming you're good at playing drums, of course.
Or assuming the whole point of that was I'm rubbish at playing drums on stage and was prepared to take a risk being seen being rubbish on something.
Okay. Well, I won't ask how it went, but that feels a bit too personal now. But
I've got this fabulous photograph of a standing ovation, but actually it was just the audience was standing up, clapping along to a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So
right.
They weren't applauding in presentation at all. They were just clapping to the drums, but it looks like a standing ovation. It's great.
Yeah, that's clever marketing, I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, having spent quite a lot of time in both the private sector and the academic world, what similarities have you noticed in their approach to people management, if any?
Let's start with the difference. The main difference is in that academia, people really, really, really shy away from leadership and management. They don't want it. Promotion is regarded as a curse because you go into research in order to research, and anything else that takes you away from research is unpopular. Food, eating, socializing, sleep. Those are all minor inconveniences that you minimize in order to do what you're put on this earth to do, which is to be a researcher. And if somebody drags you out of being a researcher in order to be a manager, oh God. So they minimize the amount of, huge, great generalizations here. There are some brilliant managers, of course there are. But as a pattern, oh, damn it, I've got to be head of department for 5 years. Well, there's two really important phrases in there. I've got to be head of department rather than I get to be, I want to be. And for 5 years, because the only way universities can get people to be head of department is by saying to them, it's only for 5 years and you can go back to being a proper researcher after that. Okay, I'll do it then. But I'll tell you what, I'll only do it for 3. And for the last 2 years, I'll just phone it in as I start to wind up my research career. My experience of business is it's less often like that. I mean, that happens, but it doesn't. There are people who are more ambitious and want to be promoted. And they think promotion is a good thing rather than researchers who regard promotion as a bad thing. Sweeping generalization alert with flashing klaxons and all kinds of things over that. But my experience of quotes, the corporate sector has been that there are people who want to, I was going to say who want to lead and manage. I'm not sure that's true. Who want to be leaders and managers, which is different from actually being a leader and manager. They want the pay rise. They want the name on the door and all that kind of jazz. Whether they actually want the job is, I mean, quite often they do, but not always. So I'm sure you're going to ask me this later on. There's a question of what's the biggest, most common curse I've seen in leaders and managers and communicators. And it's quite often that they just don't want to do it. They want to be a middle manager, gets promoted because they want to be promoted, but they don't want responsibility of having to make the hard decisions. So all they do is pass complaints from their staff up to senior management and pass edicts down from senior management down to the staff. And they don't actually act as managers in any way, shape or form. I'll get off my soapbox. Stop it, Simon. You're venting. You're just ranting now. So yeah, to back to your question, that's the biggest difference I have seen. Academics tend to shy away from it. The private sector recognizes that it is necessary and has people who genuinely wanted to do it. Some of whom wanted to do it for the right reasons.
I can't speak to academia, obviously, because I've not spent any real time there except as a student. But certainly in the private sector and a lot of the small companies, I think people want to do it quite often because that's the only route they have to a pay rise.
Could be, yeah.
Which is another problem that comes up quite a lot, actually, with a lot of other podcast guests, is about, not everyone wants to lead or manage, but most people would want more money if offered or if it was there. So if they have to go that route in order to get the more money, then that's what they'll do. And maybe businesses, particularly businesses with specialized aspects to them or a technical element, maybe they should be offering a non-management route for progression.
On the few occasions when I've seen that happen with organizations, it generally has been a happier organization. I can't claim that I've got huge, broad experience of coming across that. But whenever I have, it's been pretty successful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rare, isn't it? And goes back to that analogy we had with the armed forces earlier. They're very good at offering different routes for progression that don't necessarily involve managing people. So
yeah. So there's a differentiator there between rank and what is it they do? Rank and responsibility aren't always connected. Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah. I think that's a much cleverer way of doing it, but there we go. I'm biased, I'm sure. You certainly see very few businesses doing it that way.
Because it's difficult and because it would require a gestalt shift in the whole way that the organization worked. And it takes a very brave person to do that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think they should, but I was going to say, I think they should. I am sticking my neck out and saying I would like to think that that's what I would do. Of course I wouldn't. I know I wouldn't, but I'd like to think that that's what I would do.
Yeah, I think we all would. I don't know. I think, I don't think it's as difficult as it appears. It would take a bit of work, but if you recognize the value of doing it and you can see and believe in the rewards that the whole organization is going to get once you've done it, then why not? But maybe that's the problem. People don't see the value of it.
There's a bit of, if the system ain't broke, don't fix it. And people don't always recognize that the system is broke.
That's one of my pet hate phrases, that one. I cannot stand hearing that one. The number of managers over the years who've said that one, for me as an employee as well, and you're just banging your head against the wall.
I can see the logic of the phrase. It's just that quite often, as I say, people don't recognize that the system is broken. In the same way as they don't recognize that a zillion PowerPoint slides with text on them is broken because they've never been exposed to anything different and better.
Yes. Or it's not broken for them.
Or it's not broken enough.
Mm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's move on from that one.
Okay. Before one of us gets assassinated by some sort of senior. Yes.
Was that the door? No.
They know where you live. They've no idea where I am. It's great.
Oh.
It's your podcast, mate. You've got an address on this. I haven't.
That's true. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Moving on. Yeah.
Yes, let's move on.
Ignore everything we just said. There we go.
Yes.
So what are you most proud of then in your own business today?
What I'm going to call the penny drop moment. And I'm sure as soon as I said that, everybody knows what I'm talking about. I might be doing some training with a group of people, and there is always that moment when I demonstrate a difference in impact between the traditional way that they are doing presentations and a better way of doing presentations, which doesn't require any more effort. And you can see them just going, oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to do that. Of course, there is then the question of how they're going to do that. And that's what the rest of training is about. But there's that penny drop moment when they just recognize that what I'm suggesting is better than what they're doing. And the evidence is the fact that I've been talking to them for, let's say, 3 hours. It may or may not be 3 hours, but let's just, I've been talking to them for 3 hours, and they've been paying absolutely rapt attention for 3 hours. And then I would say to them, okay, how long do you normally pay attention for? And they go, oh yeah, I'm bored after 20 minutes. Well, the proof is in the pudding, really, isn't it? My way works, your way doesn't. Let's talk about how to do it my way. So that the thing I'm most proud of is that if you're talking about a single difference, I've helped a bunch of architects get £125 million worth of work by designing a presentation for them. And as my wife points out, you muppet, you were on a fixed day rate, weren't you? As opposed to a percentage. Damn it. So there are quite a few success stories like that, which I'm remarkably proud of. But I think the single presentation I'm most proud of is from a spin-off startup from a university in London. We're very careful not to identify, where my client, who's a young woman, is running an organization that helps women manage their menstrual cycles and manage period pain and all of that kind of jazz. And at 22, she had the guts to go on stage in front of a whole bunch of white middle-aged investors. The kind of, and she had the guts to go on stage and just go, trigger warning, gentlemen. If men had period pain, we'd have solved it a long time ago. So I decided to simulate period pain with some men. And the opening of her presentation was guys being wired up to TENS equipment to simulate period cramps. And the end of her presentation was, if you give me enough money, I can stop this happening to your wife, your sister, your girlfriend, your mother. And she just got the timing just spot on. So it was like a drum. I can stop this happening to your wife, your sister, your mother, your girlfriend. And then there was this double beat at the end. And she went, wife, sister, no, or your mistress. And then just walked off stage. Now, if I can get a 22-year-old to have the guts to do that, and she herself, she got the investment. By the time she'd walked off stage, she'd got 3 times the investment request that she was making. They were coming to her going, yeah, I get this. Or at least they were getting to the, I wanted to talk to you to do due diligence stage, which is what the presentation was all about. No one's going to make an investment just on the back of a 3-minute pitch. All you can do in a 3-minute pitch is get them to want to talk to you. But yeah, it was a remarkably sad. So I think in terms of recent presentations I've helped design, that was one. And I saw you pull a face there when you kind of said you can't get people to invest in the 3-minute pitch. Do you think you can get pitches and money out of the 3-minute pitch?
I've known it to happen in very specific circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very specific circumstances. But I would argue that that's irresponsible.
I would agree with that statement. Yes.
Because in 3 minutes, you can't have proven that what the presentation contains is not a pack of lies.
Indeed.
So the whole point of the presentation is to get them to come to you and go, this is awesome. Prove to me that it is true. And if it is true, then Bob's your proverbial uncle. But that was a very long answer to the question, wasn't it? There's lots of different things I've done that I'm most proud of.
No, I think that is a really, really nice example. Actually, what a great story. And
don't get me wrong. Not all my presentation training is that bonkers. But she had been bashing her head against a brick wall for a long time with the traditional way of asking for funding in pitches, and it just wasn't happening for her. So she'd got nothing to lose. So I'm not suggesting that everybody goes out there and electrocutes their friends.
Well, depends how you feel about your friends, I suppose. Whether you want them to stay friends.
I'm going to stick my neck out and go, if you want to electrocute them, they're probably not your friends. I'm going to stick my neck out on that one.
Yeah. Well, they won't be for long anyway.
That's true.
Anyway, hopefully none of my friends listen to this, but there we go.
Most of my friends are imaginary. I'm fine, mate.
So you couldn't electrocute them if you tried?
No, it's fine. Absolutely fine.
Well, they're safe then. That's the main thing. Let's talk a bit more about leadership then. What is the biggest leadership and management lesson that you've taken from your career so far, if you had to pick one?
This also answers the question of what I'm most proud of in my company, which is that when I'm working, a lot of what we do is solo work. But on those few occasions when we are working together, nobody can tell who the boss is. And quite often, there's very little communication required because we understand the job and we're just getting on with the job, as it were. And the only communication that's required is the literal tactical communication of where is the X, or can you hold Y, or, that kind of thing. But the thing I'm most proud of in terms of the leadership role is that leadership passes around the team depending upon who is in the best position to be leader for that project, that task at that time. And that's not to say that in an emergency, I couldn't, wouldn't, haven't, and don't start spitting instructions left, right, and center. A bit like a machine gun. But one of the reasons my team obey those instructions without hesitation is because they know that I will only start spitting instructions like that if I believe there is an absolute emergency that needs to be handled. Otherwise, leadership is kind of it's a floating thing that passes around. It's a function rather than a role or a rank or a title. So, for example, if we're talking about designing slides, I know more about that than anybody. So I will take the lead on that. But if we're talking about designing a backup document, I've got one of my team who has an MSc in education and is a specialist in pedagogy. And they will go, no, this bit has to come first. And it would never cross my mind to overrule them because they are in a much better position to lead the team on that thing. Occasionally we'll have conversations which go things like, I see what you're saying, but logistically we can't do that because X. But by and large, leadership passes around the team. And I think, that's what I'm most proud of. The fact that nobody knows. If you walked in to see us in the office, nobody, you wouldn't walk up to the boss. You would have to go, excuse me, who's in charge? which is kind of nice. And the obvious answer is we all point at everybody else and go, he is, she is, they are, depending upon what we're doing at the time.
I'm not Spartacus. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. Yes, I was Spartacus. No, you're not. Neither is she.
No, I think that's really good. And playing to your strengths as well, and recognizing that not everyone has the same skill set, but that's okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's one of my team who unofficially we refer to as an anal retentive pedant. The official title that we should be using there is proofreader. Play to their strengths. I can't proofread to save my life. I'm really good at writing stuff, but I can't proofread it. They're not good at writing, but they're really good at telling me where I'm wrong. Really good at proofreading. So why would I not let them do their thing? This is the same member of staff who once came up with the phrase, if Simon writes a document and nobody reads it, is it still wrong? Which is, I thought, quite a vicious question, but a fair one, to be honest. The answer is yes. The answer is yes, it is still wrong.
Amazing. No, I think that's a very enlightened view of leadership. I think a lot of leaders, particularly senior top managers in small to medium businesses, the ego gets in the way, doesn't it? And it has to be about everyone must know I'm in charge.
Okay,
that's one of the big.
I don't think that's ego. I think that's
not
a lack
alone.
of ego. I think that, okay, I'm splitting hairs, I'm using semantics here, but bear with me for a second. I think that is a lack of self-confidence. And one of the reasons I can throw leadership balls around to the rest of my team and go, hey, lead on this, is because I'm sufficiently self-confident to know that they won't think less of me because I asked them to do something. Claire, you're better at this than I am. You do this. That doesn't make me a weaker person. It doesn't make me anything smaller, but I can only do that because I'm confident. And here's a really important thing about leadership, I think. I have to be confident in the people I lead to recognize that in order to be able to do it. So my ability to lead in that way is very, very largely of a function of the fact that I have got an awesome team. I couldn't do it if I'd got a team of morons. I can only do it because I've got a team of brilliant, brilliant people who are so damn good at their jobs.
Yes.
I've got to get that. I'm contractually obliged to tell them how good they are in every interview I do.
Fair enough. Well, we can take that one off. I think it's both, though. I think, yes, it's the lack of confidence leads to doing much more extreme things in order to keep your own ego happy. I think, if you're confident enough and you trust your team, then it's easier to put the ego aside, isn't it?
If you trust your team and you trust that your team trust you. There's a reciprocal thing.
Absolutely.
It's got to be reciprocal. I know that my team trust me. And as I say, the only reason I can get around with spitting instructions when I rarely do have to spit instructions is because I know that they will follow them because they trust that I am only giving them do this, now instructions because that's what's needed at the time.
Yeah. Well, all makes sense to me. Yeah.
Basically, I'm thinking, when I grow up, I want to be Jean-Luc Picard from Star Trek Next Generation. That's my role model for leadership.
Okay. Well, we may have to disagree on Star Trek captains there, but let's not get into that.
Who's your captain?
Do you know, I swing back and forth a lot. It's
got to be Sisko. If it's not Picard, it's got to be Sisko.
Yeah, it used to be Kirk, if I'm honest, but that's my mother's influence because she was the original Trekkie. So
I see. I've gone off Kirk when I've heard more and more and more about William Shatner.
Yeah, again though, I think there's a lot of stuff in social media, and it's all he said, she said, and 6 of one and half dozen of another, and you don't know who to believe, really, do you?
Yeah. But don't forget that Kirk was a massive egotist.
Yes, he was.
He was a hero leader.
Yeah.
Whereas Picard, yes, he was a hero leader when it was required, but he did sit around there. Remember all those times in the conference room when he said opinions, and there was half a dozen people made suggestions, and he said, that's the one we're going to do.
Mm.
And everybody got up, went away, and went with the suggestion that he'd picked. And they went with it because they knew that he had listened to everybody's opinion, and they felt, it was validated, and they trust him, and yada. Okay. If we're going to do that, we're going to have to start comparing Doctor Who's if we're not careful.
Oh, you won't draw me on that one, I'm afraid. Yes. As a leader, yes, it would be, you're right, Picard or Sisko, but as a fan of sci-fi, I go back and forth.
Yeah. Oh, we agreed it's not Janeway.
100%, yeah.
Okay, good. Right, that's fine.
Because everything that happened in that whole series was the result of one very obvious mistake she made at the beginning. But anyway.
Yeah. If you'd said Janeway is the best, I was going to hang up on you straight just now.
That's fair. I quite like Archer as well, if we're going to go further on that one.
Yeah, kind of. I'm not watching the Archer, but I don't know him well enough. Shall we move back into leadership?
Yes, sci-fi. We're talking about fictional leaders. That's sort of leadership.
Yeah, it's kind of leadership. Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, back into leadership then. What's the worst leadership mistake that you've ever seen?
It was a casual one, and the leader was trying to do the right thing, but they had misunderstood their team member so badly, it really backfired. And they didn't even realize that they'd done it. So I was talking to somebody in HR about a training program that they were devising. And on their screen in front of them, they'd got a spreadsheet open, and down the side, they'd got courses, and across the top, they'd got dates. And in the cells of the spreadsheet, they'd got the number of people who would sign up for those courses on those dates. You with me? Have I explained that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. The boss walked past and said, "Those numbers look good. Well done." And carried on walking. Now, the boss meant it as a compliment, but the person to whom he was talking had a mindset where they wanted to be recognized for effort and hard work at least as much as outcome. And they were gutted because they just turned to me and went, "Yeah, but next year when I do the same thing, sod's law is that the dates that we choose will clash with Newcastle United's home fixtures, and nobody will come on these training dates. And it won't be my fault. And the boss will come along and go, those numbers are crap. Pull your finger out." Because the boss hadn't understood, A, what was going on. They were just a parachute, superficial walking about boss. And they certainly hadn't understood what it was that motivated that member of staff. What that staff wanted to be recognized for was the hard work that they had put into getting to that stage. So a simple thing like, "Those numbers look good. Well done. You must have put a lot of work in to get to there. Well done." And that would have made all the difference to this. And I'm using that as an example, but it betrayed to me a mindset of the boss who just superficially wandered around and thought that complimenting people was the way to go, but didn't understand the jobs that they were doing and didn't understand the people that they were managing. It's a pretty trivial example, but it as a one-off didn't really matter. But as an example of a habit that this manager had got, they couldn't understand where their team was demotivated and not pulling its weight.
Yes, yeah.
And they think, "But I'm telling them they're doing a good job all the time." No, you're not. You're just telling them things, which is different.
Yeah, and you're also not getting into the depth and making them believe that you believe that either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was transparently obvious that this manager didn't understand what was required of that job, which isn't necessary. You don't always have to understand all the details of everybody's job. No. But something as fundamental as effort versus outcome is a fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. And how difficult it is, at least. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, and of course that leads us into questions about whether the leader or manager has to have done the job. And obviously that's not practical, but for me, they need to at least understand the nature of the job and have done at least a little bit of it so that they've got the terminology and that kind of thing.
It's a difficult one, that. And again, it's the one where I swing back and forth on it, because I've been that manager who hasn't done the job of the people I was leading. And yet I like to think I did a reasonable job. I didn't get the sack and nobody quit, so that's reasonable.
but at least you recognised that you didn't know what you were talking about under those.
I did, yeah.
And I get that it's not practical that the leader or manager must have done everybody's job all the time, because otherwise they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But just a little bit of familiarity, just a bit of work shadowing, for example, would be just sit with the person doing the job for a day or so and watch what they do on a day-to-day basis. And obviously you have to deal with the Hawthorne effect of the person is being watched, so they will change their behavior. But just going, "So, okay, why did you do that? Oh, cool. Right. Thanks." And if you go in there genuinely asking the questions of, "Why are you doing that? How can I make it better? What would help?" you establish a rapport with your member of staff really, really quite quickly, assuming they trust you not to sack them for it.
Yeah. Another one I found quite useful is I just want to learn. this isn't something I've ever done. I find it really interesting. Can you spare a bit of time, just teach me how to do something? But again, you've got to be very careful with how you do that, because you don't want them thinking, teach me how to do your job so I can sack you.
Well, nobody in their right mind is going to teach me how to do your job and sack you, because frankly, if you've got enough staff to mean that you could do that, you're just sitting on a cushy job where they all do it and you don't have to.
Well, yes, there is that. Yeah. But then on the other hand of the argument, other side of it, I can also see from the follower or person being led from their point of view, if you know your manager has done your job before, then they've got instant credibility in your eyes. So I can see why. I don't know if I agree with it, but that's the mindset, isn't it? You're like,
that's the mindset. Yeah,
I respect what they're saying because I know they've done this job. They understand what I have to go through. They're credible to me.
Yes, that's the starting default position. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how long it survives reality, but that's where it starts from. Yes.
Yeah, quite. And you mentioned Steve Jobs earlier, and he's obviously a very good example of that, because there's that quite famous video that knocks around on YouTube, isn't there, of one of his disgruntled developers, shall we say, at a company conference, calling him out on it and saying, "What have you been doing? You don't code. What have you been doing? Why should we listen to you?" And his answer to that was very, very good, I thought.
You're probably right. But I need to make sure we're thinking of the same video. And unless people have seen that video, they're not going to understand what you have just said. So just for the sake of your listeners.
Yeah, no, apologies. No, so it's quite, I assume everyone's seen it, but it's the one where he says, well, yeah, no, I haven't. You're right. But that's not my job, in a nutshell, is what he says. The leader's purpose is to set the direction, is to explain the vision, is to get you guys bought in what we're doing. No, so I don't have to be the one doing the code. I have to make it possible for you to do it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, it was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yes, because there's a few with Steve Jobs, isn't there? Because he wasn't always on the money,
and he wasn't always popular.
No,
he wasn't always right, but he was popular enough and right enough to be successful second time around.
Yes, indeed, and he wasn't always the best to deal with at an interpersonal level. I've read as well. So.
I've read, never met him. I have officially no comment.
Indeed. But, you got to get the caveats out there, haven't you? So.
Oh, yeah. It's part of being a research scientist. Put all the bloody caveats out there so that,
yeah.
So that if you're wrong, nobody can crucify you for it.
Exactly. In this one video that I saw, I thought he gave a good answer to a very specific question. Yeah, no idea what he was actually like to work with. There we go.
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay. Opposite question then. What's the best piece of leadership you've ever seen?
Oh, always, it's working with theatre directors. Always. Imagine you don't run a successful theatre production by committee, because there has to be the vision, and the vision comes from the theatre director. And that's almost all the theatre director supplies. The lighting design is done by the lighting designer, to whom the director defers. The choreography is done by the choreographer, to whom the director defers. The marketing is done by the marketing team, to whom the director defers. And yet all of those people are deferring to the director because they are working with the thing that he is, or she is, statistically a he, driving with. Is that making sense? So, I toured 7 years as the lighting designer for dance companies, and inevitably the choreographers and the tour managers would come to me and go, "This is what I want. This is what I'm thinking. Can you make it happen? How can you make it happen?" And here's the following question: can you do anything better? As it happens, boss, yes, I can. Here. And on one occasion, I turned the lights out and went, "That's an artistic statement because your dancing is so it looks better in the dark." but seriously, they would come to me, and they were always the best of leaders. They got the best out of everybody because they asked what everybody could contribute to the big idea. And to be fair, that's not just them as leaders. That is the rest of us as followers, because we're doing that thing where we trust that their vision is what is necessary, and we choose to buy into that might choose to buy into that vision. So almost always, when I say theatre directors, I don't mean literally the the director of an opera, but the director of an artistic project. It could be a dance project or an opera or a play or, so whatever. And these people are working under the most challenging of financial circumstances and the most ridiculous of timetables and the most obscene levels of pressure. Levels of pressure akin to football managers. If you lose if you lose 3 matches in a row, you get sacked as a manager. If you have 3 bum shows in a row, you're never going to work again, ever. So the pressure is really on these people. So I don't apologize for using non-business as an example of a business role model. They are working in circumstances that most businesses would regard as utterly intolerable. You just can't, I can't do that for the money in that time. Whereas theatre directors go, yes, I can do that for that money in that time. And then they go away and go, how the do I do that? But they 9 times out of 10 pull a rabbit out of a hat because they've got this relationship of leading and being followed with their senior department heads.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Not something I know anything about, but,
it was part of my background. As I say, 7 years as an LD for dance companies, and I've also run a theatre company for a few years. We took, and I've written a couple of plays and that kind of thing. So I've sat in that world for on and off for about 30 years. Some of it pro, some of it semi-pro, and it's something I've got a lot of experience of. Yeah. And I absolutely adore. I wouldn't go back to it because I physically don't have the stamina for it any longer.
Right. Yeah. But I imagine it's got a lot worse in the last couple of years, though.
I don't know. I've not done it for the last couple of years. Yeah. I imagine it has, but I don't know.
You do sympathise, don't you, with that industry?
Yeah. Although I think the saddest Facebook post I read, broke my heart at the beginning of the very first lockdown, was a friend of mine who I've worked with in theatres for a long time. And they just showed a photograph of a ghost light. A ghost light is a light you leave on in the theatre that never goes out, which is a statement of intent. We'll be back. Because it's a tradition if the theatre goes dark, it never opens again. So you always leave a light on. Even if it's just a 40 watt bulb, there is always a light on. And I don't mean a safety light. I mean a symbolic light. We're going to come back. Just this one photograph of the light in the middle of the stage. That was immensely powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was nothing to do with leadership. It was just a statement of intent. But actually, in a sense, it was because what the theatre manager had done was drawn everybody onto the stage and shown them the ghost light and said, go home. But because they had seen that light as a statement of intent, we will survive. We will be back. Everybody went away much more able to cope with the crap that was going to come.
Yeah, very powerful.
Yeah, it was just a symbol, but it was an incredibly powerful symbol.
Yeah, and actually, as you say, quite a good bit of leadership. So there you go. We brought it back.
Either that or luck. I've no idea which it was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, did they eventually open again?
Oh yeah. They're back and open.
There you go. Yeah, there we go then. That's always nice.
So, but as I say, I don't know if they were just lucky or not, which is one of the problems with studying leadership, isn't it? Because you don't know whether someone's got away with it or whether they are genuinely a good leader. It's very hard to judge that kind of thing from the outside.
Yes, it very much is. I think you just got to look at patterns over time, haven't you? If they managed to replicate it, then it probably wasn't luck, which is true for anything, to be fair.
Probably, but I can think of some god-awful leaders who have left organizations just before those organizations fell apart. And the reason they fell apart was because of things that leader had done. But that leader was sufficiently skilled to jump to the next ship just before this one.
Yeah, but I think in that case, I would look at the other leaders in the organization as well. Like who are the managers in the next level down, maybe, who've actually been keeping it together.
Absolutely fair. Absolutely fair. But I have to confess, and all of my opinions of leadership here, they are based upon conversations I have had with leaders when I have been working for them as a presentations and communications trainer and coach. And I genuinely think I've got to know them because the questions I ask, in order to be a communicator, I have to poke quite deep. But I haven't been researching leadership per se. I have been driving at communications as an element of leadership. So if anybody is still listening to this after however long we've been talking, take everything I have said with a pinch of salt. Don't trust that I know what I'm talking about.
Yes, that's what everyone loves to hear from an expert, isn't it?
Well, it's one of the defining criteria of expertise, of being an expert.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually of good leadership as well is the self-awareness to be able to recognise what you do and don't know and then act accordingly. Yeah,
because one of the things I fight all the damn time with my working with senior leaders in particular is the Dunning-Kruger thing, where they kind of, the less you know about something, the more you think you know about it. So these experts that I'm working with in their communications, they don't want to make a statement because that statement might be wrong. It's only 90%, 95% likely to be true. Whereas Joe Bloggs, who's driving a taxi, absolutely bloody sure he knows how to run the England football team better than the current manager, because he knows nothing about it. He thinks it's easy. So I spend quite a lot of my time working with people to overcome the Dunning-Kruger effect and the imposter syndrome and so on, going, yeah, okay. I know there's a 5% risk here, but honestly, would you bet 95% to 5%? Well, yes, I would. Well, then make the statement. Make the statement.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which honestly, that sounds like a good place for us to stop, to be honest.
Leadership Heroes.
There's one question left, and we have to do it. We have to do it because I ask every guest this same question at the end. So it's called Leadership Heroes. And the question is, if you had to pick a person, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictional, if you want to go back to our Star Trek discussion from earlier.
Picard. Let's go with Picard. There you go. Picard. There you go. Done. Picard. Easy.
Leadership. Who would that be? And more importantly, why? So now you've got to justify Picard.
Well, I think I've covered that. Picard, because everybody trusts him to make the hard calls, even if they don't agree with the choices that he makes. They trust that he will have made the right decision for the right reasons, even if they don't agree with them. They trust him because he listens to them. And if they're an expert in what they do, he defers to them. Yes, he makes mistakes. And he drinks Earl Grey tea, which is a mistake because Earl Grey is just good tea ruined as far as I'm concerned. But apart from that, pretty successful.
Yeah, it's a good pick. I think I've had it before, but never mind. I won't hold it against you. I think one of the other things I like about Picard, though, is, and we were talking about him earlier in contrast to Kirk, but also the more sort of stereotypical leaders from, let's say, earlier generations. What he doesn't do and the way he doesn't do leadership. You know, he's not the charge in, point and shout sort of person unless the circumstances very much call for it. He's more considered.
If you're in the middle of a fight with Klingons, he spits instructions.
Exactly.
But he doesn't spit instructions unless there's no alternative.
Yeah.
A simple difference between, we're getting nerding out here rapidly, but a difference between him and Kirk is that Kirk would always lead the away team and be the hero that did the exploring. Picard is happy to send his second in command to do the exploring because his second in command is better suited to lead an away team.
Yeah, I always thought that was a TV thing as much as anything else, because in the real world, yeah, but in the real world, I mean, I've not spent any time in the military. I've worked with a lot of veterans and people who have over the years. I can't imagine any real military leader going themselves, but also taking their second, third, and fourth in command.
You're talking about Kirk there, who went himself and took his second, third, and fourth. Yeah, it's just stupid.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely stupid.
I mean, it wasn't just Kirk. Some of the others did it a few times, maybe not as much, but
everybody does it.
That's TV, though, isn't it? That wouldn't happen in the real world, so maybe that's not fair to judge. But
what you mean? It's not real. Do you mean some of the stuff we watch on television isn't real?
Sorry to burst the bubble, but
what? Any minute now, you're going to tell me that Walking with Dinosaurs was faked?
It could have been.
That's ruined my whole faith in television document.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but you know Jurassic Park?
Yeah?
That didn't really happen either.
Oh, what? You're kidding? Damn it, I thought it was a documentary.
Well, sorry.
That's it. Right, I need to go now lie down with a cup of tea now.
Yeah, on that sad note. Yeah. Well, Simon, thanks so much for your time. It's been a really great chat. I've really enjoyed it. So
I've enjoyed it. I hope it's been useful, but more importantly, I've had a lot of fun. So I don't care if it's not been useful.
Pleased to hear it. And very, very, very last question. If anyone has been interested or intrigued by what they've heard today and they want to get in touch with you, if they need some help with their presentation or communication skills, would you like to point them towards your website? Yeah,
it's the most egotistical sounding website in the world, and it wasn't my choice, I promise. Presentationgenius.info.
Okay.
And if you want to talk to me, it's simon@presentationgenius.info. But I didn't choose that title. That came out of the publishers asked me to write a book called Presentation Genius, and I wrote the book, and the whole domain name thing came out of the publisher's choice of book title.
I believe you.
It's true. Honestly, it's true. They had this idea for a series of books called Presentation Genius, Sales Genius, Marketing Genius, yada, yada, yada. And I wrote Presentation Genius for them. And then the whole brand thing came out of the back of it. If you've got a book, if you've got a book that's a high street bestseller, you're going to put a website up that's got the same name as the book, aren't you, really?
Yeah, it'd be stupid not to, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And somebody else had presentationgenius.com, so I went with presentationgenius.info.
Fair enough. And there you go. And also have plugged your book there as well. So listeners have got plenty
no point in buying the book, because I only get 10% of gross. So I'm not going to get rich on the book, I tell you.
Well, still. Anyway, well, that's great. I'll put the website address in the episode info as well, so people can find it easily. And encourage everyone to reach out to Simon. Thanks again for your time.
My pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks, man.
Likewise. Cheers. And that's almost all we've got time for today. Thank you, everyone, for listening this far. I hope you found something useful in that conversation, and I hope you don't judge us too much for our digressions into Star Trek, but it was an enjoyable chat for me, at least. Really great talking to Simon. If you would like to learn more, if you are looking for help with your presenting skills, I will put Simon's website address in the episode comments or in the episode description, so you can find that and get in touch with him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And if you're looking for some support with your leadership, please do get in touch with me as well. Again, my LinkedIn is in the episode description and also the website where you can learn more. It's www.leadernotaboss.co.uk/sign up. And I have recently launched a brand new live leadership training. It's open for enrollments for a limited time, so do act quickly. And again, the website address that I've just listed will give you more information on that. But it's particularly aimed at any new or struggling leaders and managers in small businesses or tech-driven environments who are looking for help with confidence, getting past that overwhelm of being a new leader, or having those difficult conversations. So do reach out, get in touch for a no obligation chat, and we'll see if I can help. So that's all for today. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Don't forget to join us again next week. And in the meantime, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and remember, be a leader, not a boss.